Welcome to Making Change, a podcast to understand current events and explore how to make positive changes in ourselves and the world. I am your host, Mark Gopin, Director of CRDC, Professor, and Practitioner of Conflict Healing at George Mason University. I want to talk about building a better future or better alternative futures through healing past injuries, the challenges and the possibilities of reconciliation. We have spent a lot of time talking about the challenges of reconciliation. The challenges of reconciliation as a useful form of social change basically revolve around the fact that if reconciliation is seen as a faith gesture, if it's seen as kind of a done deal, that you believe in it or you don't believe in it, and if you believe in it, then it becomes some sort of automatic thing that happens between people. We can safely say that people resent that because it doesn't begin to get at the deep levels of hurt and rage and anger. It certainly doesn't address any of the justice issues. But to the degree to which reconciliation is more of an investment in facing the past and then moving towards a different future, with the intimation, with special gestures and special ways of talking and thinking that suggest that there will be a new future, we do see a remarkable change sometimes in people. And so building better futures through healing the past injuries is a possibility. And it's a possibility through this experience and this process of reconciliation. The question is, what are the mechanics of that? And I'm making the case that compassionate reasoning is the mechanics that can bring reconciliation into the future. In other words, there is a relationship between compassionate reasoning and the future, and a relationship between the future and reconciliation. That even though reconciliation often is about past injuries, it is also about something that is quite transformative. And that quite transformative thing is an utterly new future or a different future. That moment in which people not only are saved from a terrible fate, but they can then look upon it as a departure from what was considered their fate. And when it becomes like an emblem of a different future, then it becomes possible for compassion and reasoning to take place. Another way to look at this is, let's look at the mechanics of compassionate reasoning again to see why this would be conciliatory, especially with an emphasis on the future. So I'm defining compassion as thoughts or feelings or actions that express joyous, abundant care and love for persons or other sentient beings. So you see there the elements of human behavior, of thoughts, feelings, and actions, and you see something deep in terms of care and love that are also part of the compassion experience. And these are expressed in very universal terms or expansive terms that apply to everyone. And when we see that kind of compassion, it by definition leads us towards something hopeful, towards something that is more future oriented on the way it intimates the way that the world could be. Now, compassion is often confused with empathy, and the social science, the neuroscience of this emphasizes that empathic gestures and empathic feelings are very powerful. They're very important in terms of pro-social behavior and pro-social personalities, but they also can evoke depression, sadness, adversarial behavior, antisocial feelings. How so? Because if you have empathy for one person and they are being assaulted by other people, and if you really, really deeply internalize their empathy, such as, for example, a victim of a genocide, then it can cause you to hurt inside so much that you start to hate and look for blame because you can't bear the level of pain that you're feeling and you need somebody to blame. So it's very much related to what becomes scapegoating. Compassion causes a different kind of reaction. And the neuroscience of this is that we can see compassion going in a different neural pathway and affecting different parts of the brain than empathy does. And here's the interesting thing. So it doesn't mean that empathy isn't a pro-social pathway, but empathy can much more easily turn to neural pathways of distress, of high cortisol, of high blood pressure, of anger, especially as the adrenaline rushes and then gets exhausted. Whereas compassionate care, where you look forward every day to all the people you're going to take care of, there doesn't seem to be any downside from a health point of view. And it points to a sort of universal activity. And here's where it points heavily towards the future. And that is that when the person feels compassion for many people, let's say it's a parent who loves the whole family, and their compassion isn't focused on one child who's a favorite over another child who's not a favorite. It doesn't focus on one parent and against the other parent. It actually, in this case, is a compassion that is felt to all the family. That doesn't mean that all the problems and conflicts disappear, but it means that they're handled very differently. Because if you have an incredible amount of empathy for one parent because you believe and your narrative inside your mind is that this other parent is the one that caused all the problems that destroyed my mother's life, my father's life, that kind of empathy with one leads often to exactly the kind of exhaustion of the adrenals and the cortisol and the depression and the antisocial behavior. But if you love both your parents or if you love all your children, and you are also seeing at the same time that your children are at war with each other at a certain juncture, what it provokes in somebody who's training themselves consciously in compassion for all is that they now are curious about what they can do to be good to everybody despite the conflicts in front of them. And that leads them to the moment of ethical calculation. It leads them towards the ethical calculus or moral reasoning of how can I be compassionate to everyone given the complexities of the situation. It leads to calculation, it leads to curiosity, it leads to moral reasoning, which is very much dependent upon if-then statements, causal connection statements, that basically it's a causal nexus. It means it's a chain of events. And you say, if I do this, then maybe this will happen. If I do that, then maybe this will happen. So I'm going to think about how I could do something that's going to make everybody happy, or something that's going to give a good feeling to everyone. We're going to do something together. It's going to make a good memory, and it's going to be hard for anybody to see this as favoritism or as favoring one child over another or one parent over another. And that process of reasoning, of what's called if-then causal statements and causal thoughts, that's the basis of reasoning about the future. It's about calculations of the future. It's moral reasoning because the goal is goodness. The goal is kindness. The goal is compassion for all. And then one gets into the interesting ways in which the different theories of ethics can each have their own contribution to that kind of reasoning about the possible futures that would lead more and more to reconciliation, or that would at least be conciliatory in and of themselves. So, one school is, of course, moral sense theory, where compassion itself is the training and the goal and the ultimate ethical experience. So, that one is self evident as to how that would fit with the kind of neural training and neural pathway training that we're talking about that leads in a future orientation and a conciliatory orientation. The other one that's most obvious is consequentialism, or what's called utilitarianism, and that is the calculation of the best possible outcome for everyone concerned. And that is very close to reasoning in general. It's very close to planning, and it's about adding up all the pros and cons and figuring out what's the best possible outcome here that would lead to the compassionate situation that would increase the happiness, the net happiness of everyone, or the net goodness that everyone experiences. Those are all consequentialist or utilitarian arguments. The final big one is called deontology, or principle-based ethics, and that is a important corrective to some of the gaps in other forms of moral reasoning that would not lead to very compassionate outcomes. So that, for example, sometimes your brain can tell you, the best possible outcome is that I'm going to lie to everybody, and I'm gonna con them into this and con them into that. And then it turns out that lying in general has a pretty bad pedigree in terms of the history of human experience with ethical dilemmas and ethical situations. And so that a universal principle that comes along is basically lie as little as possible in terms of pro-social goals and pro-social environments. So it steps you back from violating certain principles. Or, for example, let's say the best possible outcome for the family is that we rob a liquor store together. We get all this money, and I'm going to make every child happy. I'm going to give a Swiss bank account to each one of them, and we're going to rob the whole corporation that I happen to run, and we'll all live in Switzerland happily ever after. And so human experience suggests that that kind of violation of universal principle actually, in the end, is inherently damaging to the soul. It's inherently damaging, for sure, to society, and it's a violation of ethics, basically. So moral reasoning is a delicate balancing act between different schools or different emphases that all, I am arguing, lead to a compassionate approach to others, and an approach that is future oriented. And I'm suggesting that that future orientation, that balance of moral reasoning, that training of the mind in best possible outcomes, which is a rational training, all lead to better possible futures. And that exercises the best parts of the human mind, and it draws energy, or I don't like to use the word energy, but it draws the blood vessels and the neural pathways away from the automatic responses of fear and anger and rage and desire for revenge. It puts it all towards the future. It puts it all towards calculation. It trains in compassion, and it comes up with basically the best kinds of conciliatory gestures. Because in the end, this is also a process of creating the best possible imaginative mind. The imaginative mind of best possible futures is also, with training, a compassionate mind. It's a training that focuses on the maximization of compassion for the largest amount of people. And this is where, if you see that film, 7 Years in Tibet, and you see the evolution of Brad Pitt's character, from an extremely selfish mountaineer who doesn't care about anybody else to somebody who just has joy and indulgence in caring for others through the Dalai Lama's influence, the young Dalai Lama who was just a teenager at the time or a child and already was incredibly precocious according to all accounts. This is a true story. It's based on a book of a man who was a lifelong friend, an Austrian who was a lifelong friend of the Dalai Lama in the midst of just a terrible tragedy in the Dalai Lama's life, losing so much of his family, uh, his entire country, and yet coming through it with this incredible training and compassion that leads him to be a joyous character. And this kind of joyous character that he has and his focus on compassion as part of his training with his specific interpretation of Tibetan Buddhism, this has an enormous impact on Brad Pitt and Brad Pitt's character, the mountaineer, who does an about face in his life. Now, stories and narratives are really important. And the story that Hollywood tells, and this story that was based on a novel, based on a true story, is very important in terms of the evolution of character that it demonstrates. But this by itself is not enough to truly change society for the better. What needs to happen is a comprehensive process of private and public education that finds a way to institutionalize into habits, into ways of learning, and into ways of relating between the generations. So that, for example, programs that put together elders together with children in school, that puts together children in school and high school students and as well as college students together with those in need, whether it be helping them to build homes, whether it be helping them to um, to manage their lives better in terms of finances. There is a myriad of ways in which compassion can be inculcated together with moral reasoning into the way in which society relates to itself and relates to the different people within it. That is the key to the future. Building moral reasoning into human society and into the future of humanity in such a way that is truly conciliatory, in a way that builds a society based on reconciliation between those who've been very wounded by the past and by past relationships, is that we need to find a way for this to go into private and public education. What I mean by private is that the education we do within families, the education we do within communities, the educational models we have for children, but also the educational models we have for the public. And public education from the time of elementary school all the way through college is a critical component to the formation of the good society. And the good society is based on the capacity for a truly interested and caring relationship with others that leads to compassionate attention, compassionate words, compassionate actions, and the dealing with difficult conflicts and dilemmas through moral reasoning that is consistent, that is fair to all, that values all human beings, and in particular with an eye to the future and a conciliatory future, as opposed to an obsession with past wrongs and past miseries. For that to happen, we need to find a way to take the best lessons of stories like 7 Years in Tibet and put it into education. So I would suggest, just as a small example, that the relationship between generations, both elder and younger, is a very fruitful place for compassion. This needs to go into curricula. This needs to go into family planning. We need to think about ways in which we can develop customs and habits and educational curricula that emphasize the learning of people from generations, that we match elders together with young people, that young people can learn from the old, and the old can be comforted and receive compassion from the young. These experiences of compassion across generations leads to a deep space of meaning and the discovery of purpose in life, the discovery of the future, and the evolution of character, of who I want to be in the world. Every child, every high school student should be asking themselves, who do I want to be in the future? And the political question, what kind of country do I want to live in? What kind of community do I want to live in? This is where an emphasis on compassion education, moral reasoning education, through relationship building across the generations is critical. Another way to look at this is the opportunity to serve those who are suffering in some way. It could be visits to hospitals. It could be visits to places with people with disabilities. It could be work with the poor on building housing, the way that the great President Jimmy Carter, has done with Habitat for Humanity, but in a serious way that's incorporated into the daily, weekly process of character formation. Clearly, this would also require a, a training and into do's and don'ts and into instructions, and also a learning from mistakes, because there will always be mistakes that people will make in these relationships. There needs to be a curricula in class and with teachers trained in ways to manage the kind of differences or conflicts or failures that come out of such experiments, because that is the way that people can grow. And in particular, the emphasis that I've always placed is on self-examination as a key to human growth, as a key to the evolution of the human mind. All of these things can be put into an educational system that is willing to evolve in such a way that humanity can cope with its challenges of the present and build a flourishing future of a global human community more in touch with each other, more related to each other, and also more related to the world of animals, because animals and the treatment of animals and the care for animals and the care of animals for us as humans is another great resource for developing the capacity for compassionate reasoning and the capacity for reconciliation. The other thing about this that's very important to emphasize is the importance of habit in character formation and the importance of messages that keep getting repeated. One of the great mistakes of pure academic education is the notion that the really complicated things like biology and mathematics, they need a lot of repetition in order to develop skills. But these very simplistic ideas of loving people or caring for them, well, we should just say it once or twice here and there, but it's going to be integrated into people's character. Not so. You need just as sophisticated a repetition and evolution of messages of compassion and moral reasoning and a focus on future and the ability to make conciliatory gestures, to speak conciliatory words. That takes practice and training and repetition. I know that it also has some implications for the treatment of depression and other forms of difficulty with the human mind. I've had the privilege of caring for my mother for many years now, who is now 101 in 2024. And she's had a steady case of one aspect or one type of dementia. And dementia varies enormously with each person in terms of the affected part of the brain. In many ways, she is very aware of who we are, and it just has an increased uh, emotional uh, emotional reaction to many things. But with a little bit of help and with the help of the doctor, she has a basically positive attitude to other people, except a strong sense of the tragic due to things that happened to her very early in life. And part of helping her flourish, even at 101 in her own house, has been a steady process of messaging that has helped her see the positive and see the beauty and see the gratitude every day. Part of that is she mostly sits in one cubicle of her house in front of the TV. I have focused the TV on very much on happy shows. Uh, she loved comedy her whole life, so she watches reruns of Friends and reruns of The Andy Griffith Show and a few others. But especially, we've placed messaging around the cubicle that focus on appreciation of life every day, a focus on gratitude, a focus on love. And at first, it didn't seem to have much of an impact. But as I watched her walk, she loves to read, but she can't read books anymore, but she can read signs. And over time, she started internalizing those messages. She started saying them. She started saying them to everyone. And I was just amazed at the power of habit, the power of a conscious creation of a nurturing, loving environment combined with a certain set of, of reasonings based on compassion, based on care, based on a positive approach to every day, even to the future, even at the age of 101, how she evolved and is far healthier in terms of her emotional life than she was 2 years ago at 99. That is amazing. And it is yet another example of how we have great potential as people to develop our own character at any age and to also help others to develop. And I believe that the key to that is what I've come to call compassionate reasoning, a focus on the future, and a reframing of things in terms of the future and in terms of positive values, and a search wherever possible for a conciliatory approach to life, toward a healing approach to conflicts that emphasizes the future. Thank you for joining me on Making Change, a podcast to understand current events and explore how to make positive changes in ourselves and the world. I am your host, Mark Gopin. Please check out my recent book, Compassionate Reasoning, Changing the Mind to Change the World, Oxford University Press. Also check out Healing the Heart of Conflict, 8 Crucial Steps to Making Peace with Yourself and Others. Plug those titles into Google with the words Mark Gopin and books. Please see our Facebook page, Making Change with Dr. Mark Gopin, and website, markgopin.com. Blessings to you today for a healthy mind and body, for safety and for a flourishing life. For personal consultations and coaching, please contact me at gopinmark@gmail.com. See you again soon.